Hi grade 10s, it's Miss Langrage here, and today I am making our last video for grade 10 2020. So I'm excited about it, and I'm sure you're excited to be nearly done. So our video today is about factoring, and factoring means taking an equation that's in standard form and changing it to factored form. So you need to look for two things today in order to do this part of the summative. You need to look for page 5 where it says video 5, and you need to complete that chart, and we'll talk about that chart in this video. And then you also need to look for the document I shared with you earlier, maybe a few weeks ago. It's called Factors, and I shared it with you in Google Classroom, and I'll share it again just in case you can't find it. These two documents are essential for you to be able to wrap up grade 10 math. Okay, so we're going to first look at an equation that is in factored form already. And factored form means it's got brackets, and within the brackets is some important information. So this equation is y is equal to x minus 2, x plus 3. And when you have those numbers in the bracket, they tell you the x-intercepts. They tell you when the graph is along the ground or along the x-axis. And because the equation said minus 2, on the graph it touches at plus 2. And because the equation said plus 3, on the graph it touches at minus 3. It's always the opposite. So in grade 10, what we want to do is we want to learn how to change this equation that's already in factored form, change it into standard form. And so you're going to do this again next year when you get to grade 11, but your teacher might not use this little chart. I like the chart, so if next year you're confused, you can go back and remember the chart method we used this year. Okay, so here's my equation, and don't forget that when we have two things right next to each other pushed together in math, it means I'm multiplying. So what this question actually is asking you to do is multiply this x minus 2 times this x plus 5. And I'm going to use the chart to do that. So I'm going to write down x minus 2 and x plus 3. And the thing that's neat about the chart is that the chart lets you spread out the multiplication. Instead of just multiplying once, we're going to multiply 1, 2, 3, 4 times, put all those multiplications together, combine them up, and we'll get the final answer. So what I want to do first is I want to multiply x times x, and that is x squared. And then I want to multiply minus 2 times x, and that gives me negative 2x. And then I want to multiply x times 3, and that gives me 3x. And last but not least, I want to multiply the 3 times the minus 2, and that gives me minus 6. So instead of just multiplying once, I multiplied each little bit, so I multiplied 4 times. But what you need to do now is put all of this together, combine it in order to find your final answer. So that means that I have x squared minus 2x plus 3x minus 6. Okay, last step is we need to simplify. And when we were in grade 9, we learned how to simplify. Simplify just means put the parts together that go together. I've got two parts here that have x. I've got the 3x and the minus 2x. So if I have minus 2x plus 3x, or if I have 3x minus 2x, that gives me just 1x. So this is the same thing as x squared plus 1x minus 6. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Desmos to make sure that the graph of this is the same as the graph of this. Here I am in Desmos. I've graphed x minus 2, x plus 3, and I've gotten my curve. What I want to check is that when I take this equation that I've changed from factored form to standard form, that standard form gives you the exact same graph. Because these two equations, they're the same, they're just written in a different way. So we want to write down x squared plus 1x minus 6 in Desmos. So here I am, and I'm going to enter y equals x squared plus 1x minus 6. And when you see that the blue graph is actually right on top of the red graph, which means that they are the same. They're the same graph, which means that I have not made a mistake when I use my chart method to change from factored form to standard form. Now, the hard part is, for the next part of the lesson, we're going to talk about how you go backwards, how I start with standard form, use the chart, and go back to factored form. So that's going to be our goal for the rest of this video. We're going to look at this equation, which is in standard form. We want to use the chart and we want to go backwards in order to find the answer in factored form. And the reason we like factored form is because factored form lets us graph easily. So here's the chart. Now remember, what we want to do is we want to put the equation that's in standard form on the inside 4 boxes, and then we want to find the answer for factored form, which will be on the outside at the top and on the left-hand side. And in order to do this, we're going to rely heavily on the chart that I shared with you in classroom, the factors document. And we want to use this chart and we want to find the number that's at the end of the equation. So at the end of the equation is 10. So I want to use this document and find the 10. So here's the equation one more time. Why am I looking for the 10 in that chart? Because the 10 is the last number that's in this equation. So I'm going to go back to the chart and I'm going to search for 10 in that chart. So here's 10. I have drawn a red box around the 10 part, and I notice that there are 2 options, 2 things that multiply to 10. Either 1 times 10 or 2 times 5. Those are the only choices I have when I'm trying to fill in my chart. Okay, so here I am. I'm going backwards, and remember, the chart told us we could use 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. When I look at those 2 options, I know both of them multiply to 10. I could go 1 times 10 gives me 10. I could also go 2 times 5 gives me 10. I'm going to pick 2 and 5. And some of you might already know why I'm picking 2 and 5. The reason I'm picking 2 and 5 is because I also need to get to the 7 that's in standard form. And if I have 1 and 10, that's never going to help me get to 7. But if I have 2 and 5, 2 plus 5 can get you that 7. So let's go backwards, okay? So we know the 10 goes here. We know the x squared always goes here. That's always the case. The first number in standard form goes right here. The last part in standard form goes right here. And then these 2 parts together should combine to give you 7x. So that's why I'm picking 2 and 5. If I put a 2 here and a 5 here, 2 times 5 gives me 10. I know I need x's here always. 2 times x gives me 2x. And 5 times x gives me 5x. And the nice thing about that is when I add the 2x and the 5x, it gives me the 7x. So that means I have put the standard form on the inside. I have the x squared plus 7x plus 10. And on the outside, I have the x plus 2, x plus 5. So I know that my equation is x plus 2, x plus 5. And the reason we want to change it from this to this is because this is not very helpful when you're graphing. This, however, tells you some great things. It tells you that since there's a plus 2 here, at minus 2, okay, it tells you that if there's a plus 5 here, it means at minus 5, okay, and then my graph is going to, okay, the middle of those 2 numbers I think is right here, so my graph is going to look like this. And there's one extra thing which is really interesting. One last thing that's interesting is that this number right here, if I take 2 times 5, it gives me 10. This last number here tells you where this touches on the y-axis. So this right here is the y-intercept. The y-intercept would be 0, 10. And the x-intercepts would be -2, 0, and -5, 0. These are the x intercepts. Okay, so what do I need to do with this chart? If you start with something in factored form, you need to write the answer in standard form next to it. If you start with something in standard form, you need to write the answer in factored form next to it. And then you also need to write down what the y-intercepts and the x-intercepts are for each of the equations. And this question is going to be our last question for grade 10 math. What we want to do is we want to take the equation y is equal to x squared minus 10x minus 24 and change it to factored form. And this question is a little bit more complicated because there's negatives, but we're still going to use that same chart that I shared with you to help you, and you want to look for 24 on that chart. You want to look for 24 and you want to look at all the options next to it. Why do I want to look for 24? The reason I want to look for 24 is because that last number in standard form is minus 24. So we're going to look for 24. So I've done that already. You can see that in my chart, I've made a red box around all the options of numbers that multiply to 24. Now, the only thing you need to remember is we don't want plus 24, we want minus 24. So we're going to have to decide which one of those two numbers, when one is positive and one is negative, are the best combination to give you 24. Is it going to be plus 1 and minus 24? Is it going to be minus 24 times 1? Is it going to be 2 times negative 12? Is it going to be 12 times negative 2? Is it going to be 3 times negative 8? Or negative 8 times 3? Or 4 times negative 6? Or 6 times negative 4? When you are multiplying to a negative, one of the numbers needs to be negative and one of them needs to be positive. Okay, so here's my equation in standard form. These are all the options I got from the chart. I know that one of them needs to be positive and one of them needs to be negative because they're multiplying to a negative 24. So I also know I want to get to this 10 here, this negative 10. Now, you might think right away, well, 4 and 6 give you 10. But the problem is it needs to be 6 and minus 4 or minus 6 and 4. One of them needs to be positive and one of them needs to be negative because I'm multiplying to negative 24. If I have 6x and minus 4x, that gives me 2x. If I have negative 6x and 4x, that gives me negative 2x. So that's not going to give me my negative 10x. I need to go back to my options, it's not 4 and 6, and find another group of numbers that could give you a 10. And when I look at 12 and 2, I realize that if one of those were negative, then I could get a negative 10. So I'm going to put negative 24 here. I'm going to put my 2 and my 12 here. I know that one of them needs to be positive and one of them needs to be negative. Let's make this one negative and this one positive. 12 times negative 2 gives me negative 24. I know we need x's here. I know that this x squared always goes here. And I know that these two together need to give me negative 10x. So let's see if this is right. X times x is x squared. X times minus 2 is minus 2x. 12x, 12 times x gives me 12x. And then 12 times minus 2 gives me minus 12. 24. Speaking gibberish. Okay, so negative 24, x squared. Now, the only problem is when I do 12x minus 2x, does that give me minus 10x? No, this would give me plus 10x, so I've made a mistake. So what I need to do, instead of making this negative 2, I'm going to make this positive 2. Instead of making this positive, I'm going to make it negative 2. This becomes positive, this becomes negative. 2 subtract 12x would give me negative 10x. That means my equation is going to be plus 2 and minus 12. And if you want to make sure you hadn't made a mistake, you'd graph this. You'd graph this in Desmos and make sure that they are the... So that's it for grade 10 math. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, a WhatsApp, an Instagram. I'll be online this weekend. I can help you this weekend. I can help you on Monday or Tuesday. I just would love you to try this last part of the summative before saying you're done with math for the year. Okay? It's been a pleasure teaching this year, and I really hope you have a great summer.